Good day and welcome again to another series in our webinars for the Caribbean Youth Film Festival. This week we have Rene Judd, who is a cinematographer out of California, Hollywood, has done a couple of feature shorts, TV series. We will definitely be speaking with him on cinematography and life in Hollywood, what it takes to get to that level because the webinars are basically we put together for young professionals and people in the Caribbean, extended to St. Lucia and the rest of the world who are interested in filmmaking and that process. So we're trying to bring as many experts to you guys as possible. So this is our 9th edition of the Caribbean Youth Film Festival. And as I said, we're doing these webinars to basically bring, the world to you, the filmmaking world to you. I'd like to thank the OECS, the St. Lucia National Trust, the Department of Creative Industries for providing us with those services and your sponsorship. So let me again welcome Rene Judd to the Caribbean Youth Film Festival webinars. So welcome, Rene. How are you doing?
Hi there. I just typed in, hey, everybody, good to be here. It's a pleasure and it's a privilege. What can I say? Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I enjoyed the last week's. And I wasn't able to join for Joel, but I joined for Bob's last week, which was great, and it's been quite a journey for the three of us, I can tell you that.
Right. So this is our third one, as we said, and we've been speaking to Bob Hopkins. We spoke to Bob Hopkins last week. Then we spoke to Joe the week before. Joe is an editor. And Rene, so I could just say that is a team by yourself, right? You guys have worked on a couple of projects together.
Yes.
So I'm happy that you could bring your expertise to the table for us. And we're trying to work again in the future on a feature in St. Lucia. So hence my connection with those gentlemen, that we're currently working on a project called Adventures in Paradise, which will be a feature that we're trying to shoot in St. Lucia and turn into a possible TV series. The whole reason, again, is to expand the film industry in St. Lucia, give the opportunities of what could be a massive industry to St. Lucia, with all the economic benefits that will come along with it. As you know, it's an industry, and so we need everything that goes along with it, the marketing, the catering from the ground. We're talking about carpenters, extras, makeup, the works. We basically need actors, camera people, production assistants, so it is an extensive piece of project that we're putting together. So, but let's get into it, Rene. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got started in the field, how long ago, and just a little more about yourself.
Oh boy. Well, I grew up in East Germany, out of all places. If somebody still remembers it. I got out of high school in '84, and we had a draft, so I served 3 years at the enemy's army, obviously. No, not really. And then we had quite a strenuous procedure to get into film school at all. But I managed, with all the tests in the first year, and then they had a more selective group the next year, and then eventually they took 8 to 10 people every 2 years. So that was my path to film school for starters, and the time in between I bridged as a camera assistant, as an AC at the time, solely on 35 millimeters. So I learned how to AC, how to pull focus on Aries and all that at the time. That was pretty interesting stuff. We also had a few months at the lab. We were working at the film lab, where they were developing films and reverse films and intermediate and then prints for theaters. So I kind of knew the whole process at the time that I actually went to film school in '88. And I spent 11 semesters there. Started in East Germany, then the wall came down in '89. Which was an interesting time to begin with. So we were working heavily in the documentary field in those crazy years, when Germany was reuniting and all that. And we won a couple of awards actually at documentary film festivals. That was quite an honor. And eventually I graduated. We had a very cinematography focused education, given the fact that, like I mentioned, that there's only 8 to 10 people every 2 years that had the privilege to go to the school. And after the 11 semesters, I had pretty much experiences in multi-camera for television, single camera for television, and film camera, and all the other corresponding arts. We were, bombarded with music theory and literature theory and art theory, and but then again, it's all theory. So you have to, as they say in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So you have to go out there and get started in your field of passion and pre-trained expertise. And so I did. And after a couple of years in working in documentaries, I had shot at that point already 3 or 4 documentaries in the US and in Canada on World War II veterans, on Vietnam veterans, on the FBI Academy, how to become an agent, and things like that. So another one in Mozambique on all these immigrants that were sent back from Germany because the contracts with former East Germany had expired. So we accompanied a couple of these guys back to their home country, and through all the troubles that they went back there, coming back to Maputo and all these other towns, there was kind of like a civil war going on at the time. And then I've been to Cuba filming a documentary there. And after all this, I'm like, there's got to be more than that too, So I had been to the US for work, but I said, well, I've never been to the West Coast. I kind of gotta go to LA and figure out what's going on there. And so I did at the time with a friend from film school. And the first year we were just having fun, having friends coming visit from Europe, because we were the exotic two, living in LA suddenly. And after a while, when the money ran out, we had to figure out how to either go home or stay there. And we decided to stay, and we got a little PAL camera package. At the time, I don't know how young or old our audience is, but at the time there was still a difference between the European and the American and South American system. PAL versus NTSC.
NTSC,
50 frames, 50 hertz versus 60 hertz, or 25 frames versus 30 frames. And so we decided to do a PAL island, like for European clients, offering PAL services in an NTSC country. And that kind of started to pay the bills nicely, all the way through 2015 or so. I focused very much on that. But at the same time, around 2000, I had covered a short documentary on Bob Hopkins, actually, because he was heavily involved with the hobos, with the so-called hobos that ride freight trains for work, for leisure. So he always took CEOs or other film people on these trains, and we shot a short documentary feature on that for a renowned German outlet. I think it was Spiegel TV or something. And a year later, my phone rings and Bob goes, "Rene, I'm going to do a movie with the hobos." I'm like, okay. And he's like, "Well, you want to be the camera guy?" So I said, "This sounds great." We had a good time already doing the documentary. So I jumped right at it, and brought on another intern of mine at the time as a sound guy, Christian. He's a good man, And so we went out with a bunch of hobos, as they say, and started shooting that first feature, and it came out great. So Bob had me on others since, and the word got out. Rene doesn't only do television work or documentaries; he does quick-handed independent feature work, and the rest is history. I think I've done about 15 of those by now, ranging, as I always brag, in budget from $12,000 to $12 million. Speaking of the one in Puerto Rico, just to disclose the numbers. And so in that range, I've done anything. About half of them found their way into either streaming services or Amazon's disc sales or DVD sales at the time. They were playing on Stars and Encore in rotation for 4 years. I did a horror flick and like an adventure flick, a similar treasure hunt movie, to be honest, not on an island, but very spiritual stuff. And it's always fun and challenging. But that's I guess in a short version how I got to where I am today. Still trying to figure things out. But hey, it's a journey. Like I said, yesterday when we spoke briefly. You know, it's a journey though. So you just keep paddling. You keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I always say that, it never stops. And that's the interesting thing about it. It's not just about learning the new skills, but you would well imagine, as you said, you went from the different formats. We're speaking about how, Star Wars was made on basically
Yes.
video camera, and now it went from film to different formats altogether, and you kind of have to keep up every time. So it's always very interested in how you keep yourself relevant, and that's a challenge for as you mentioned. You asked the question, but I think with most of the people that we have today are young filmmakers. So our conversation, I guess, would be a lot of about nurturing their minds into what the expectations and where they should go. So even with those new formats and stuff like that, what would you say right now you think, say, a young filmmaker who is interested in cinematography, where you think that he or she should really put their efforts in terms of trying to get from that independent young filmmaker, just putting out your skills and the type of equipment, and because sometimes we could get inundated with trying to get the big camera, and or I guess small cameras could actually still do the job. So how would you advise somebody that has working with a very small budget to get their work out and make it look as professional as possible?
Just in comparison, I left out one little thing at the time when I started out, and that is in about 1980, I got a Super 8 camera, Super 8 millimeter, which was basically the starter format at the time. If you were even had the slightest ambition to try anything with film, you would get a Super 8 camera. They didn't even have sound. The sound was separate, and it was never in sync. So, but I got one of these cameras in 1980, totally out of curiosity. I wasn't fully aware that there's something like a film school or so that you would eventually have a chance to go to and all that. So out of sheer curiosity, I got started with, this very simple device. You had these spools of film, 3-4 minutes, send them off to the lab. The postage paid for the development. Think about that. It came back to you, and that was the exciting day. So you roll out the film strips on this little machine with the crank backwards, forward, and then you could do basic editing with this. Like as it used to be linear. You cut the film, splice it, and glue it back together, and try to make sense of it. And in all honesty, to leap forward to today, that hasn't really changed. You have to start with something simple to figure out how curious and how passionate you really are about things like that, and also, I guess you're asking about cinematography in particular, so we already set in that department. But along the way, you might figure, oh man, I might be more into editing or into writing or something. But I think cinematography is a nice area to start with because it's so visual, and it's the essence of film and storytelling and movie making and all that. So it's a very good in point, and I think if you start with something very simple, as we said yesterday, like DSLR cameras, I would still recommend to do that because heavy duty equipment is by far not as expensive as it used to be, by the way. We talked about these numbers, what equipment used to cost, especially in the late 90s or in the early 2000s when you were buying serious cameras and lenses and all. That has slightly changed for the camera department, at least. Lenses are still crazy expensive, in my opinion, and way too diversified. There's too much competition in the lens market, I guess. But a small DSLR camera does a lot of things for you, and they are so sophisticated now because they support things that weren't even possible or not even preconceived in the 90s or anything. Like I'm talking about altering the color chemistry, either in camera or even more importantly after the fact in post-production, and even smaller DSLRs now, if they're up to date from Sony or Canon, they do allow what they call log. It's a way to compress the full capability of the sensor, not in terms of resolution, but in terms of what it captures from the details in the shadows to the details in the highlight. to compress as much of that as possible into the recorded signal, and to make a decision later which way on that spectrum you're going to push your actual image, And many DSLRs now allow that too. No big deal, You buy a Sony, anything from the Alpha series or the Canons, anything from the 5D through the generations, starting with the third, fourth. I think they're already at the fifth generation now. You have great opportunity to play with, with all these experimental things that the professionals play with as well on bigger and more expensive cameras. But the basics are the same. It's all condensed into these fairly reasonably priced cameras, and you can try yourself out as a filmmaker, as a cinematographer, as a storyteller. It's going to be easy. And then you have gadgets that you could get along with that. A gimbal for stabilization. You don't need a Steadicam if you're starting out. A gimbal allows you to jib a little bit. You don't need a crane right away and all. You get a drone. You get a drone for $800. You make crane shots that nobody has ever, thought of. So it's actually a nice way to get into it, I think, nowadays. In terms of the equipment and the technological advances that were made since when I got into all this. That's I think my 10 cents on that part.
Yeah. As you said about the drone, I was speaking to somebody recently, and we were talking about going up in helicopters, and that was my experience in going up in helicopters, is basically to get some aerial shots. So I was saying, look, today you don't even need a helicopter. You just take a drone and you get that done. So it has changed. A lot of things has changed the game. But in terms of you, as you indicated that you have worked on many different levels of production, from a 12,000 to a 12 million. What in essence is the difference for you as a cinematographer in working in those different budget ranges?
Well, besides many others, but there's of course some funny notes. The catering is one difference. And I have
catering is important.
And I have to say,
keep the crew.
You have to keep the crew happy. No, the catering is great even on smaller shows, because people know that, you better feed the crews. And honestly, we had lots more beer on the smaller budgets, at the end of the day, with the gaffer and with the key grip and all the interns. It's a family much faster on a small production. On a big production, yes, it's it's union often, so you have a lot of ranks going on and all that. And also, in all honesty, the bigger budgets make you slower. You're a lot slower in everything that happens on set for some reason, unless there's a crazy emergency, which typically that's not the way you want to work. So things are a lot slower because they're going through chains of command, basically. You just as an example, and I mean, God love the unions. There's nothing wrong with unions, but if we're shooting a scene with two cameras and then there's something in the shot that bothers me as a DP that needs to be moved somewhere, I can't just jump there and do it because we're about to roll. Somebody from the art department has to come to set, or probably hovering somewhere nearby, I'm not saying, and needs to move it, So, man, on a production like with Bob, we would be, whatever needs to be moved will be moved. One of the actors will maybe move it. I will move it. The sound guy will move it because he's standing right next to it, That's just an example of the general mindset of a small production versus big production, I mean, the luxury on bigger production is you usually have more filming days, which takes a bit off the pressure on some of these key departments. If you're doing a movie on a, say, 14-day, 18-day schedule, like we did most of them with Bob, I think, wow, that you shoot honestly sometimes 6, 7, 8 pages a day. It depends on how dialogue heavy it is, or on how action heavy. Action heavy, obviously, it's easy to write a line like, somebody gets out of the car, goes into the building, stalks up the stairways with the gun drawn, but you have to have so many setups to make that happen. So something that reads in 7 lines, you know, can take you all day to film sometimes, you know. And on a bigger production, you have the luxury of dealing with that in a timely manner, I guess. But again, I often, well, the grass is always greener on the other side. If I'm shooting a small budget, I'm like, oh man, you know, let me go back to television and shoot some interviews or whatever. I could take a breather now on a bigger production where I don't even have to touch the camera. That the operators do that, you know. But when you in it, you're like, oh man, where's Bob's movie? You know, let's do the next one with Bob. That was so much fun to have this family feeling and to have this quick pace and everything. You know, it's a little bit of both on either end of you know, of these things that I've done over the years. Yeah.
So curious enough, I as you said that. So when you're on a big production, what is your role? What do you find yourself mostly doing?
So we would typically prep in a way that we scout locations, meet the other key departments already sometimes weeks before. You know, the most extreme, I had it in Puerto Rico. I was there a whole month prior. The director was there 2 months prior, I think. So that was quite a pre-production effort. And we would, once I arrived, we would basically for the 3 weeks see every location with all the key departments, take lots of notes, take pictures, you know, discuss logistics like power versus generator, or, you know, large lighting units that kind of need to be preconceived, you know, because sometimes scaffolds have to be built and things like that. And that can take up, I mean, you know, weeks and weeks. And we're not even talking heavy visual effects or anything, right? Visual effects on that movie were all done after the fact, just by manipulating a few shots, taking things out and all. But there was no visual effects in the sense of like, that we would have to add dinosaurs or spaceships or anything, you know. Then you would also work with the visual effects department heavily to you know, get prepared for the collaborations with them once production gets started filming, you know. So that is quite a heavy prep. And then by the time you get into filming, it really depends. If I operate myself, I'm pretty much stuck on set all day, and you're kind of trying to coordinate, you know, your gaffer, your key grip, all your other guys running cables, setting flags, and whatever, however complex the lighting effort is, you know, to get the best look in the allocated amount of time, and you know, make it happen based on your prep also, and based on the day where suddenly the director is like, oh man, you know, I know we prepped this, but let's do it a little bit different, or let's try something else, or I don't feel it yet, you know, we have to. So then you gotta react and make it work based on some new input that you suddenly received, you know. And that is in the role of the director of photography, kind of like 2 departments at the same time, the light and the camera, you know. So which is it's quite a job. That's why sometimes it helps when you have a long-standing relationship with, say, like a gaffer or a key grip, so they kind of read your thoughts already. And at the same time, ideally, if you would have an operator that, you know, you trust and that you've worked with before, that is of course extremely helpful as well. So we don't have to deal with the mechanics of the camera, how high, how, you know, how low do we need to come over here? Do we need to make, you know, a little bit room so the camera shooting across on a scene with 2 people is not on the edge of the frame too critically and all that, you know. Do we move the camera or not, or what, you know? There's a lot of last minute decision that can never be prepped. They will always be made on the day off, I would say. And that's how I split my attention, I guess, on you know, on set when it's actually going down day by day, you know. And then beers at night. You really need it to take the edge. I can tell you that, man.
I have a couple of questions, and I want to get into the production that you speak about. Let me just tell our listeners that the production that Rene speaks about is imprisoned by which was done in Puerto Rico with Florence Fishburne.
Mhm.
And we want to get into a little bit of that experience. But I also, you spoke about cameras, like different cameras, typically too, because I always try to tell young filmmakers, because again they see scenes on so many different angles and stuff like that. But typically, how many cameras would you work with on a set, on a given set? Because I always say that my notion is that the director, correct me, likes to work with maybe just one or two max, because he wants to get as much of that visual control.
Mhm.
Is that moving out in terms of, or is it multi-cameras seem to be more of the norm now?
Do you see multi-camera to be the norm now? No, I wouldn't think so. In fact, the greatest cinematographers, like let's say Roger Deakins, right, or Lubetsky, Chaiwo, they typically use one camera, and when they talk about it in their podcasts, they give you good reasons why. They operate themselves often, so they want full control. They only employ more cameras. Let's say when Deakins shot Skyfall, he talked about it. They had scenes with up to 11 cameras. That's when they burn down a house or something, right? But if it's an average scene with average physical action, they prefer one camera shoot still, and there's something to be said about that, because you could always choose the optimal angle. You don't have to compromise for other cameras, which also applies for the lighting, I'm guessing, right? It's not always easy to light a set in a way that could be shot from every angle or something,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
so is it my preference, multi-camera? No. We did shoot two cameras pretty much at all times in Puerto Rico, and we had a third one often just to stand by, for either to go on the crane. If you put it on a techno crane, it takes like a while to prep that, so you don't want to undo all your rigs that are on sticks or on dollies, so you have an extra camera, or have it for the steady cam or something. But as soon as it gets a little smaller, like the things that we shot with Bob, were all single camera shoots, and I think there's even a word for that they use in the industry, single camera feel, or how do they say that? It's not. It doesn't appear to be something that was cut in a mixer while it's happening live with six
Right.
cameras in a studio, even though it's shot on film. It has to have that feeling as if it was one camera. Even at times there might be two cameras employed, but it's a single camera show basically. And I prefer that work style. Like I said, I'd rather shoot even the dialogues over the shoulders, one after the other. Most actors, they are so prepared there, they can easily do it and redo it, and unless it's crazy emotions or that the physical action involved with the dialogue is too complicated. But then often you would opt for handheld, for instance, or things like that, because if it gets too convoluted and too complicated, often you have to cut the camera loose and make sure you give the actors a chance to perform intensely, but also capture it in one run without actually interrupting or anything, right? The tendency, I wouldn't say that there's a tendency. It really depends on the movie and on the complexity of a scene, and of the, if that's even the word, repeatability. If something could be repeated easily, or what, if you could reset easily and redo it, or if it's a one-shot affair, as they call it, then of course you may have, the producer will insist to employ more than one camera, of course. Otherwise, it might get too expensive on his end, But that again is like a range of problems that you would have to consider when you make these choices, versus out of one camera, which is a preference, I would say, not only for me, I think for many camera people, but also between that and other logistical challenges on a production.
Yeah. So we thank Joe for joining us today. Joe was with us 2 weeks ago. Yeah, as we mentioned. So he asked earlier on, when you spoke about being in Germany, he asked if it was in Munich or Berlin.
Yeah.
So just wanted to go back and answer him on that question.
Yeah, briefly. No, the film school was, let's just say, near Berlin. He got it right. Yeah. Munich and Berlin always were the two major film schools. Like nowadays, every university has their media department, and there's at least one or so private school, I believe now. But at the time, the only two public schools, and as you may know, education in Germany to this day, and including East Germany at the time, is free. You go to film school 11 semesters, it's free. It's I know it's inconceivable if you live here, but in the US, but becoming a doctor is free. Becoming a lawyer is free. It's just insane. It's just a different culture, I guess. I mean, somebody's got to pay for it. Of course, the professors have nice salaries and all that, but it's simply not coming from the tuition of students.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of financing the next generation that is getting ready to be lawyers and doctors and filmmakers and all that. And so the only two public schools, but then again, they were dedicated film schools. There was no, medical department, or there was no, law department, or there was no whatever department to train teachers. It was dedicated film school. Were Munich and Berlin. And the one in Berlin is actually in a town nearby. It's called Potsdam, Potsdam. They have, to this day, a very renowned film school. They just relocated it into a different building, because when I was there, we were in these older buildings that had been taken over after Germany and Berlin was split between the Allied forces, right, in 1945. And we happened to have all these old, villas. Like, I mean, how do you visualize that? 3-4 story buildings, that the state owned it, and they had one for the production offices, one for editorial, one for the camera department, and for the multi-camera training facilities. One, 2, 3 of them for student housing, and all that. The whole school only had 200 students in 5 different classes of, let's say the class of whatever, 1985, the class of 1987, like I said, every 2 years only, and the class of 1989, these 3, and then split it up between directing, cinematography, sound, animation, production, acting, and make it 1 or 2 more. So 7 departments, bang, and there you go. There are like 200, 230 students. So it was a very intimate experience, I have to say. And the school has that same profile still to this day, and so does Munich pretty much. I'm sure they updated, in fact, I was visiting every few years now and then, because some friends of mine are professors there now, or they took a 5-year teaching, assignment and all that. So I kind of kept up with them. One of our professors recently turned 80, so I went to the party, because I randomly was in Germany at the time, and also it was all pretty interesting things. I'm going to type the name in your Potsdam.
Okay, cool. He has another question about Joe has another question for you. He asked about your lenses. Which lenses do you prefer?
Yeah. Honestly, we have to split that again between the lower budget and the bigger budget productions on because Joe was asking me directly. In Puerto Rico, we opted for Cook lenses. They have a slightly more vintage look, people would commonly agree, I guess. Even if they built them high tech and brand new, they have a different look than Arri Master Primes, or Arri Ultra Primes or something. Not as sterile for some reason, if that's the word to describe it. Since the Puerto Rico movie was technically set in the 1990s, we figured that would be the route to go. They offered us, they had Leicas there, which are super precise, super sharp. They open super wide. I mean, I think 1.4, most of them, or 1.8 or so. And we tested those. They had the
just for technical
and the Cooks. So we opted for the Cooks because of their look, basically. But they're all prime lenses. So we got a set of. It was insane. Cook has a crazy variety. I was going to say maybe 14 different lenses, from starting at probably 12 mil to 180 or so, and a couple of zooms. You have to have the zoom sometimes for your Steadicam guy, otherwise you drive him crazy when you constantly swap out the primes. Then you can't do it for 12 million. You need 120 million. Then you really have the time to swap primes on your Steadicam. Otherwise, you drive him crazy. Plus, it has to be a small zoom he can't carry that weight, on
Yeah.
Steadicam. So, and it's mostly wider focal lengths on the zoom as well. So you don't need a crazy honker like an ingenieur, like these crazy ingenieurs, these 25 to 250 or so. They're probably like, I was going to say 30 pounds or so, and they make smaller ones. So the Steadicam guy needs a little zoom, and that's a good start. And then now going the other direction, smaller budgets, I basically shoot it all with zooms. There's no time to swap lenses or, do things like that. Plus the zooms now have improved so much in terms of their sharpness. It's basically like a variable prime. That's what it really has become with some of these zooms. I own a couple of them myself, 3 actually, like an Ingenieur and another Canon, and they are serious lenses for work on a tripod, or even handheld work. They hold up very nicely in focus. They open up wide, and they still support, say, the work of an AC. They have the gear so the AC could pull the focus if that would be the work style that you go for. That the operator doesn't do all that himself, but there's a split of responsibility. So, but smaller budgets is and will remain zooms unless somebody insists, or we have to do it with primes because it's only sit down and very calm and very controlled. But an adventure film that we're about to engage here with Bob and with you guys and on the island hopefully soon, that will have to be zooms just because of the work style, because of the unforeseeable circumstances. You set up somewhere and then you're stuck with whatever the physicality is on a location shoot. You got to cheat a little bit sometimes. Can't move the camera, so you might as well zoom in a tad. It's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I mean, I know zooms are always like, oh no, can't zoom. It's like it's TV. I mean, I don't mean to zoom on the air per se during the take, but
Yeah.
other than that, they zoom in transformers and everywhere. You just don't see it. It's like the greatest cinematographers. Like when you investigate later, Vittorio Storaro, they zoom. The Last Emperor and all that. You'd be surprised. They know how to hide it. With another move or something.
Okay. Well, let me just remind folks who have joined us that we're doing a series of webinars, and we have Rene Judd with us today, and he's a cinematographer. And let me just thank our sponsors, Caribbean. Well, we're the Caribbean Youth Film Festival. We'd like to thank our sponsors, the OECS Secretariat, the St. Lucia National Trust, the Department of Creative Industries, Event St. Lucia, Lucilec for all making this possible. Before we get further, Rene, I wanted to speak to you further about your stint the movie that you've been speaking about for a little while now, which you did in Puerto Rico. And that movie is called Imprisoned, and it was with starring Lawrence Fishburne. So just tell us a little bit about that experience. How did that happen with you?
I mentioned that I worked through the years on independent production, starting with Bob in around 2000 and making several productions with him. But I had at least 3 or 4 other directors that I was able to develop working relationships with them. And one of them is Paul Kampf. Paul Kampf is Kampf. Type it in here, you can look him up. He's quite a pioneer in independent filmmaking, I would say, because we've also done, like crazy micro budgets, and put together a movie in 7 days or in 6 days or whatever, and shopped it around quite successfully in festivals, in the festival circle and all that. And as the challenges grew for him, and since he is also a writer who, a pretty capable writer, mostly very dramatic, archaic conflicts, that's his thing, I guess. He was writing a script for the screen. It's not based on any books or anything. In a prison, where the warden kind of turns bad and frames a former prisoner who had done his time to come back to prison, and eventually, since there's still a death penalty, assumingly, which got us a lot of criticism, by the way, for because there's no death penalty in Puerto Rico. But anyway, it's a movie, right? So, and eventually kills the guy, but he can't stand the pressure, and he thought he will take the prisoner's wife eventually because he was in love with her and all. So it's a very dramatic triangle, of love and conflict and all. So that script eventually was picked up with a company out of Portland that Paul also co-founded, it turned out, at the time. And they were looking for, an increase of the already committed cash budget. And they found it in the Puerto Rican incentive program. And we had, I want to say 2 other options. One of them was Ireland. And what was the third one? Can't think of it right now. But ultimately, they opted for Puerto Rico, for it being, on the U.S. territory and all that. It still seemed more doable than going to Europe or something at the time. And that's how we got started after, probably, I want to say 8, 9, 10 projects with Paul prior to that, also working up in the budgets and in the themes that we were covering, from heavy drama and personal reconciliation to what I would call, no offense, like a chick flick, just girls having fun on the outskirts of town, being a little bad, buying some drugs. And so one of those we did just to get started with that same production company, and then they liked what we were doing, and then we eventually had to find the cast, which is always the biggest problem, to get somebody to commit to the project and then to commit to it during a certain time frame that either you have in mind or that fits the available cast, for their availability. And it turned out to be Lawrence in the end, which was great. Of course, he's a legendary man. It's if you think about it, he was in Apocalypse Now. He was, I think, 17, and it was probably 50 years ago. Something like that. It's just unbelievable. And we did what I described earlier. We went through pre-production and attached some good people that we were hoping to bring to the island, just because those were key collaborators that we knew. And it weren't very many, though, because it was a union production that, you lose a lot of incentives if you bring too many people from the mainland, so it had to be a trade-off, I guess, to make everything work. But there we were, finally, I think in 2017 or 18, we went there and filmed. I was there for, I want to say, about 11 weeks or something. It was quite an experience, to be honest, quite a complex experience. And a lot of experience with the ranks that I touched on earlier briefly, with a fully staffed union crew. That's a total different approach than shooting, hobos on freight trains. Either one can be fun, but either one has its challenges, and they're entirely different, I think, to a large degree.
Yeah. So, but in terms of working on it itself, in terms of the technical aspect of it, give us a little bit of that. What went on in terms of on a daily shoot. The setups, dealing with the unions. Where were you guys able to shoot? Because obviously, I even noticed in the trailer that James almost is not.
Yeah,
so it's not just
almost. Yeah,
it's not just Lawrence Fishburne, but you have a few big guns in there. Did I see Andy? Was it Andy Garcia? I saw in there. No, I saw another.
John Huertas. John Huertas. Huertas. He's a great Hispanic cast. He plays that other guard that kind of goes behind the warden a little bit, and is a lot nicer with our prisoner, because of course the audience sympathizes with the prisoner and all. And Juana Acosta is a very well-known Spanish actress from Europe. She was also cast to bring in some pull for European audiences and Latino audiences and all that. Ed almost is a legend in himself.
Exactly. I also explain that to when I do workshops with the young filmmakers. I also explain that to them that when you're doing a film, you must also look at your target market and see who you could bring in to be able to attract that target market. So that's something that Hollywood does often, and you know, we only, or there's just the viewer wouldn't realize that. But as you just mentioned, there's an actress from
Totally.
Europe they brought in to attract that European market. So
Totally.
if you're doing say like something on a restaurant, you know, you bring in a popular, you know, restaurant owner or something like that to put them in the film. So I just want to reference those things back to you know, our young audience listening to us, so they'll understand, you know, the process of doing those things and the reasons for doing those things.
The casting, I mean, I can only briefly mention that too, maybe, because I'm good friends with Paul Kampf, of course, like I am with Bob, and so he fills me in on some insights that are not necessarily in my department, and I really noticed how the cast and the distribution is attached, you know, behind the scenes, kind of in a weird way that you wouldn't believe it. We were first negotiating with Lionsgate, I think, and man, the requirements they came up with and the demographics, the preconceived demographics for different markets, you know, let's just say Asian hotel chains, or you know, males in their mid-30s, you know, you won't believe what lists they already have for you know, Lawrence Fishburne, of course, you know, Juana Acosta, they know all these people. Our other lead guy, man, the prisoner, oh my God, I can't think of his name right now. Juan Pablo Raba. You know, he was in Narcos. He played one of the lead in Narcos, like the brother of Pablo Escobar. He was they were both killed. I mean, Escobar in the second season and his brother in the first season. But he was our, you know, prisoner guy. So they know all their demographics, and I couldn't believe it. And they almost try to get in and tell you, you know, how to cut the trailers, and they wanted us to change. They wanted us to change the native, you know, music from there's a fisherman theme in there, because, you know, we're on an island and all that, and we have a lot of Hispanic music in there, or music that fits the, you know, the fisherman, you know, lifestyle over there on the island, and the local culture. And man, they wanted rap music in there. I'm like, okay. And Paul just told me I wasn't part of these negotiations, and then eventually we had to settle for another distributor. It was just, it may have hurt the distribution, I'm guessing, you know, but man, you have to be true to what you set out to do, you know, in the project, man. Changing course halfway, and I don't know, it wasn't my call anyway, but I was intrigued by that much detail of what's going on there, you know. Anyway, sorry, I kind of lost track, but we were saying to drop that in. That's, you know, not directly the cameraman's department, but you'd be surprised on how many problems you touch. You know, it's not just setting lights and moving the camera from A to B. I can tell you that, you know.
Exactly. So I guess that's why you prefer the independent the independent genre, because you don't have to go through all that, right? You don't have to
you could say that, I guess. Yeah, to a degree, you know, to a degree.
So we're just basically saying, so in terms of the setup and stuff like that, like what cameras did you use on that shoot
in Puerto Rico? We used Alexa Minis. At the time, the LFs weren't available yet, the large format. So it was, you know, an Alexa Mini, two of them actually, and on days with 3 cameras, we used a regular Alexa, not the Mini. And then, you know, this enormous set of Cook lenses, couple of dollies, because once you gear up the cameras on a shoot like that, you know, the whole camera department, they want him on the dolly just to push him around. They don't want to carry it. You know, it doesn't even mean you always do a dolly shot, but they use the dolly like a tripod, basically, because they are heavy clunkers. You know, on smaller productions, I'm often, if I don't have or want to move the camera, I have it on sticks. I mean, that's what I'm going to do. You know, it's a lot quicker to set up and all that. You know, and I can do it myself real quick, push it over there, and then line up the shot, change the height a little bit, and, you know, tweak the light, and we're ready to roll on the next setup, you know. And do that with the dolly on my, you know, it takes 2.5 people to push the camera, you know, in these narrow spaces and all that. Or sometimes you have 2 of them. Sliders are a good compromise, I feel. I owned one myself. It was stolen out of my storage. A very heavy duty slider. That's, by the way, speaking of equipment that you might want to use early, I would almost prefer a slider over a gimbal, to be honest. If that's some form of advice, there's pretty great sliders out there, especially for DSLRs. You don't need a heavy duty slider like I had it, the ones that use speed rail and like a heavy, cat or whatever you call them, the cats with the wheels. I don't even know what's the word for that. The dolly, I guess, the mini dolly. Yeah. But you could just get a very reasonably small and not too long of a slider, 3 feet, maybe 4 feet. Some of them come in 2 parts, like 2-3 foot parts. It gives you a 6 foot slide. That's an enormous, improvement to the imagery you're creating. If the camera travels, but controlled. The gimbal is great, but honestly, you could do as good, if not better, with a cell phone. With an iPhone 11 Pro, you could probably do better than with a gimbal. It's just to what it has come these days. But a slider is a force to be reckoned with. I would always recommend a slider as an early tool because it makes a distinctive look that separates from everyday, Instagram type of filming. You produce images that are meant to be that way and that, transpond a certain idea behind them or something, or they give a bit of a suspenseful feel to an opening shot or something, or they dramatize as they push in on a person or something. And for that, you don't need 20-foot tracks or something like they used to in the 70s, the Italians with Bertolucci and all that. Sometimes you have a dialogue and you can tell they put an 80-foot track there or something, It's still being done, but man, like I said, that you need to add yet a 0 to the 12 million, so yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of what you were saying about the different budgets, and one of the things I was just thinking about is the movement of setups. How long, in terms of your average setup, would it take when you're doing?
Yeah,
those big.
That brings back part of your previous question, I guess, in Puerto Rico, in terms of Puerto Rico too. We did have the luxury that on certain sets we had a rigging crew in Puerto Rico, right? So that means based on our scout and based on 2-3 days prior communications before the actual filming day, the rigging crew would go there and set up scaffolds with larger HMIs or pre-light certain sets and all that. That is a very helpful way to work if you have the means to hide all your lights outside, and that makes the sources automatically bigger usually because you have to put them further away anyway, and that's a helpful way to work, and then on the day off, the interior little tweaks, you often, have to do some kinoflows, believe it or not, or LEDs, a lot of softer LEDs nowadays, or on night scenes, you start with the practicals. I would say, night interiors to see what practicals you have, like sources in the room that are already established from the art department, and how to enhance them, how to emulate them and all that. And you move in, discuss your blocking first, Sometimes they're a bit secretive about it. The director doesn't want anybody in there. Sometimes they want the DP in there, So then you get an idea what the actors, based on their lines that they have to say, what physical action they apply. Because many scenes are not just two people sit on a table and talk. Many people involve little micro actions. Somebody comes in the door, pours a coffee, and while all that happens, they go from A to B to Z. One sits down, the other one gets up, looks out the window. The child enters the room, there's a brief exchange. The child leaves. They make references to the child that has just left suddenly, and there's a lot of micro actions that need to be plotted out. And by the time you have that, you're like, oh boy, okay, that's totally different from what I thought. How this scene is going to play out. But then you kind of have to start setting up your shots and tie as many of them together as you can, and leave that to Joe, for instance, later to cut them apart and place them accordingly so it makes sense again. But you don't want to break up the performances too often, I guess, and and just make actors say a single line or so. You could make them repeat the single line. Directors, I think, do that a lot for variety, but you can't just chop up dialogue, you know, in a crazy way that you know, takes them out of their takes the extra actors out of the part, out of the character.
Yeah,
you know? It gets too technical. They don't appreciate that either, and they would, you know, let you know, I guess, right away that, you know, they would prefer to go through with the performance. You can tell. I mean, but to make that happen, of course, you will, you know, let them off the set for a while, and then get your lighting guy in and your grip, and see what needs to be tweaked based on what you just saw. And after a while, you're ready to go, between, you know, exterior lighting that, you know, blasts through the windows, let's just say, and interior tweaks like fills or negative fills when you need to take away light or something, you know, or get practicals or get effects, you know, people watching TV, and then you reverse, so you want to see the flicker of the TV on their faces. You got to deal with details like that all the time, and then ultimately they come back in, and then it changes again. But but that's I guess that's basically the rundown.
When in terms of B-roll though, which is B-roll would be just for those out there, B-roll would be the additional footage that you would get. In terms of B-roll, what do you usually do the same format cameras, or is it a lesser camera that you would use on most shoots? How would you go about getting your B-roll?
It's the same camera. It is the same camera with the same settings and the same color chemistry and all that, you know. There is times where the B-roll is shot after actors are being released, for instance, even if it's not too distinct, let's say tattoos or so, somebody else's hand or so, you'd be surprised. Or there is a version of shooting inserts, they call it Insert Alley. There's sometimes setups of 30, 40 inserts, and they just get a DP for one day who shoots all the inserts that are being requested at that point, most of the time, from editorial. So they don't have to overshoot inserts while they're on set. They're just deciding which inserts they want later, and then they bring back props and all that, and, you know, they know which tablecloth was used or whatever. You have all that from your script people and all, right? And then they reshoot inserts in a couple of days. That's also a version, you know, on bigger budget movies, and that's often not the same. It's not the same DP. If you look at the credits for Apocalypse Now, which was shot by Suraro, there's an extra insert credit for Caleb Deschanel, who is a very well-known, you know, and respected DP in his own respect by now, right? I think he won an Oscar even for The Right Stuff, Right Staff, and all that. He shot the Lion King movie, this virtual movie in recent years and all that. So he had an incredible career, you know. He was credited for inserts in Apocalypse Now, by the way. It's just a funny anecdote I figured, you know. So yeah. But then again, so now scale it down, smaller productions. Bob's like, hey, or Paul Comfy, you know, Rene, you know, let's get that insert of the guy flipping the pages or whatever. Sometimes also we combine them with the action. So an actor is in the middle of his performance and Paul tips me on the shoulder, or Bob's like, go down, do the book. So, you know, we have a continuous moment, which makes it more authentic than cutting to an insert. You know, you pan to your insert and you come back. Yeah. And, you know, and in terms of timing, the guy, just as the camera comes back, might have his final reaction to what he just read or something, you know. So the camera supported that notion, or the director feels that that's a possibility, and then he would brief the actor and say, okay, next time Rene comes up with the camera from the book, have that reaction, you know. That typically is sometimes discussed in real time on set as cameras already roll. I've experienced that also a lot, you know, that the director just makes adjustments as cameras already roll, you know.
We have a question here.
Questions here.
From Mark. What is the secret to create a continuous shot with no edits, no cuts. For example, a 2-minute long scene moving from room to room. I know a Steadicam would do that easily, and that is done a lot with TV shows, especially now, because every week you have to produce a TV show, and if you're doing a cop show or something like that, and there's a lot of movement in terms of action, it's a Steadicam just following the crew around and getting away from multi cuts. But you go ahead and explain with your experiences.
Well, like a room, like let's say on an interior, like from a room to room, like you already mentioned, it depends a lot on the action that's happening in the frame, because that determines how much prep you need to have for this. If you're just going between two rooms through the door frame, maybe pull back a little bit through the hallway because somebody's coming up, goes into another room, comes back to this room, you follow back on, let's say on a track that you already been on or on the slider, and you just, peek through doorways and all. That could probably be extended, depending on the physical action, to several minutes if need be, right? And depending on how freely the camera is set up. If it's on mechanical tracks or on a dolly, there's probably limits to it. With a good dolly operator, though, you can do a dance floor, they call it. So it's, the operator would push the dolly, even though there's turns through doorways and all that, without tracks through the room, if the floor allows it, right? But then again, if you free up the camera a little more, let's say on a Steadicam, or of course people love their gimbals these days. I'm not talking a small hand gimbal, I'm talking a rigged up gimbal, that requires a trained operator with lots of experience and all. You could of course create endless shots until you run out of media on your card, or with that, the limit I think is also given by how much physical action can you possibly prepare. How much can the actors memorize? How many props are involved that need to be placed correctly, or what happens if somebody forgets their lines or so. There's many things that could interrupt the continuous shot, I'm guessing, but there is no secret to it really, other than your own imagination and your own creativity and your own skill to push it as far and as reasonably long as, like, let's say the storytelling factor would require it, or as your own ambition challenges you, I would say. You look at 1917 would be a classic example, or many of the La La Land even is it's not a one-shot affair. I think Birdman is one of those too. I think they really have very, very few shots, which translates into one thing: very intense prep for every single shot that you're stitching together. You might end up prepping for a week, and rehearsing and go deeper and deeper and deeper into the shot. Every time you're hitting a barrier or like a wall, and you're like,
we lost Rene there for a bit. But what I also want to, maybe I could add to that, is that with a lot of the movies nowadays, it's a lot of quick action, and unlike in the 50s, 60s, where movie making was a slower process in terms of what you actually see on the scene. We didn't have those quick, what was dubbed the MTV type of edits. So our audience got a lot more intelligent in terms of wanting quicker action, and that lent a lot to the camera movements and different angles and that type of thing. We lost you for a minute there, Rene.
Am I back?
So you're back now. So
okay.
I was just filling in until you came back.
Here, but I hope it holds up now. Yeah.
But I think that question was basically, I hope that we did justice to that question.
Yeah.
For you, Mark.
I like I said, it's, first of all, most of these shots are not continuous, but of course, yes, to great length they are, very, very continuous. If you want to hear about the 1917, there's a pretty good podcast from Roger Deakins. You could listen up on that. And there is one continuous movie that I know. It's called The Russian Ark. The Russian Ark. It was shot by my friend's film operator,
that's a famous
Tilman Büttner. Tilman Büttner. I punched
really?
it in
Okay.
and that
Because that's one of the famous movies.
That is the true continuous shot for the entire movie. That was not stitched. And he talked to me about how they had to break down lights while they were filming because the camera was eventually coming around to that and all. You know, it goes inside and outside, and my goodness. And those were the days where, you know, they still had to carry like hard drives on the Steadicam and all that. And it was a total different ballgame. You know, not just a small media card. That was quite a thing to do a 90-minute movie in one take. Russian Ark. I'm going to type that in here too.
Let me just say that I wish we would get a chance today, but I am a certified Steadicam operator.
You are,
and I am. So when we're doing a lot of the training. So I haven't done it in quite a while though.
Okay.
You know, that's things you have to keep on doing all the time in order to. But one of the things in terms of knowing a lot more about Steadicam and stuff like that, that's one of the movies that were basically spoken about, the Russian Ark. And obviously we know that the first movie that used the Steadicam was actually Rocky, when so it was actually that new invention, you know, that Brown did, and everybody jumped on it after that.
I recently read about that.
Yeah. So I understood when you spoke earlier. I understood about the weight of the Steadicam, because I could tell you when I was doing the training for Steadicam, when I went home, let me tell you, I just had to go on the floor because my back was killing me. So I understand.
I never understood how that is possible. You know, how much physical, say, strength do you need to train for and bring? If I see that thing with the center of gravity in front of me, it's like, you know, I'm carrying a fridge on my arms stretched out. You know, it's impressive. It is an impressive skill. Yeah, and
it is.
I've never done it. They put it on me in Puerto Rico on my request. I'm like, okay, but I knew I was going to fail. It's not easy. It's not easy.
And obviously, there's a certain kind of movement that you have to move with it. There's a certain way you walk. There's a certain way you know.
Start on the slider. Maybe a gimbal. You know, a gimbal I think is easier to learn. Steadicam is a hard trade to learn, I tell you, and it's an expensive gear to own. You know, and it's something that many producers now, for budget reasons, you know, replace with gimbals and sliders. I'm thinking, or even a decently executed handheld camera can do a lot. You know, but yes, there's a place for the Steadicam, no doubt about it. I'm just saying, you know, it had its run, and
Joe's asking, that's the one in the Petersburg Museum. Yes, it is. That's the one.
That's the one.
So I also wanted to when we spoke earlier, I had a question for you in terms of when we're just kind of linking Joe into it. So how much work as a cinematographer do you leave for your editor to do? How much work do you take? Because a lot of young filmmakers, a lot of young filmmakers today do stuff and they say, "Oh, we'll take care of that in post." And I'm like, "Oh my God, there we go again." It's like post is, you know, the answer to everything. So how much, in terms of how much do you actually leave up to your editor on an average shoot, and how much do you really do on set when you shoot it?
I would say, with intent, I don't leave anything to the editor that I would be uncomfortable with putting him, you know, or presenting him with problems. When you shoot on set, you try really hard to deliver the best results without, you know, making other departments cry later or you know, put a burden on them that they can't, you know, that they can't solve. So I guess if you refer to this "we fix it in post" line, that is, you know, of course, the post people, by the way, I've seen avid things on LinkedIn and all that. They have a shirt that says "fix it on set," which that's the spirit, you know, that's the tug of war. But of course, these departments, they love each other. They know they depend on each other and all that. And I wouldn't leave any problem to the editorial department with intent. You know, it's more like that. Once they start to put it together, it has a whole new feel to it again. You know, unless you shoot and say the Fast and the Furious, they're literally duplicating what's already there in the storyboard. You know, it's basically an intern could slap it together. I'm just, no offense, of course they got trained, very skilled and trained editors to do this too. But the movie is preconceived in such a precise storyboard that they barely deviate from it. You know, so they're more than anything, they don't leave anything to chance, or they don't leave anything to like a fix it in post kind of an approach, unless in the visual effects department. That's different, of course. You know, they got flying cars and they got people, you know, in harnesses with cables that are making them, you know, fly around and whatever. That requires a certain visual effects effort in the end, but they know that when they're shooting it. But let's say we're shooting a narrative movie without major special effects, I would not take that chance and say, man, Joe, you know, I really messed up here on focus. If it's out of focus, then it's out of focus. What's Joe gonna do? You know, and or let's say we had a shaky dolly ride, then, you know, Joe will either be able to take the remaining good parts of it, or we'll throw it out altogether. So we will have to actually make some of these determinations on set already, and then reshoot it, you know, right there and then. It's always hard, by the way, to say to the director, hey, one more take. Many directors are like, oh no, we got it. I saw it on the monitor. I'm like, oh my God. You know, I did not see it. So it's always, you know, it depends on who's talking and who's making decisions and all, I guess. But I wouldn't with bad intent leave.
Yeah, we're losing you a little bit. I don't know if you're yeah, so yeah. But I just wanted to remind folks out there that if you have any questions for us, please do so. We want to wrap up our conversation with Rene in a bit. Apparently now we just lost him altogether, I think. But again, I would just like to thank you guys for tuning in, for making this project possible. Without your participation, obviously it wouldn't happen. Let me see that Joe is asking a question. Editing, Rene's shots are the easiest to cut, okay, and they're very cinematic. No, sorry, Rene, we can't see you as yet. So I don't know what happened on your end, but okay, so he's asking us to wait a bit. We lost him a bit. But again, I just wanted to encourage all your young filmmakers out there. Oh, he says, Joe is saying he can see. Okay, but okay, there you go. Finally, I wasn't seeing you. Yeah, you're back. Yeah, you're there. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. But if you have any questions before we wrap up, I just want to encourage you to send in your questions and remind our young filmmakers that the Caribbean Young Film Festival is still on, and we're on our final leg where in the next 2 weeks our groups will be actually producing their short films, and all these webinars would help them understand the process of filmmaking, so it becomes a easier. Now we lost you, Rene, again. So it'll become an easier process for you guys. So yeah, we're having some issues with Rene coming back on. Let's hope that we could get him back to possibly to wrap this up before we we go any further. But any questions out there from your guys who are tuned on? And even if you're not in St. Lucia, you could maybe give us an idea of which country that you actually viewing this from. So it would be good. Let me just say that again, we're speaking to Rene. Last week we spoke to Bob Hopkins. The week before that we spoke to Joe Pulaski, and they're part of a crew. Hopefully that we're working on a feature to be shot in St. Lucia called Adventures in Paradise, and we're hoping that this could happen within a couple of months, and we bring the industry into full swing to St. Lucia and bring all the benefits that could happen as part of a film industry. And I think we lost Rene altogether now. Not seeing him at all. Any any anything on your end, Fire, in terms of are we seeing him at all? How do you have him? Have we lost him completely? EC Holger, there he is. He's back.
Yeah, he's back now.
There's a little echo. There's an echo here.
Now we got an echo. Oh man, technology.
We have an echo now. But anyway, I think that we did a good run today, and I think that we could basically close up. The other thing, the last question I had off my head when we were speaking earlier, in terms of again, I want to refer to our young filmmakers. A basic kit. What would that? Serious echo. What would that comprise for you? A basic production kit for a young filmmaker.
A basic production. Say that again.
Yeah, a basic production kit for a young filmmaker. What would that comprise for you?
Did you say bid? A bid? Production bid?
Kit. Production kit.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Wait, does everybody have an echo now, unfortunately, or just
yes?
You
I'm hearing an echo.
At least I got back. I had to get off the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
There was something wrong here. I don't know why, but I'm on my hotspot now. But I guess we had the same problem similarly on your end when we were preparing this afternoon, right? Yeah. But anyway, basic production kit. So, like we said earlier, start with a DSLR. Get a slider. Get they're making great LEDs, but not only opt for these flat surface type. They're producing a pretty glowy flat light. They make focusable ones now, kind of like with a Fresnel lens. One I can think of from light panels, the company light panels, is the calipers. The calipers that's a nice little kit with focus lighting, because with the abilities of these newer cameras now, even in the prosumer world, you only need to set accents sometimes. A little accent here, a little accent there on on some background element, or a little fill light that you're bouncing off a cardboard or something. You don't need to light whole rooms anymore, like in the olden days when you had a 100 ASA film or even 500 ASA film or so. The cameras hold up really well to, honestly, 4,000 ASA, 660, 400 ASA, no problem.
I think
it's
is your audio up? Because I think the echo might be coming from your end.
I have my audio almost down. I'm down to probably.
Okay, you're better there now. Hello? Okay, we lost you. Okay.
Is it better?
Okay, you're much better. Yeah, you're there now. Yeah.
I'm way down.
But you're excellent, actually.
Was some of that at least comprehensive? Could you hear that? And a little grip. I was gonna say, get a little grip, get some bounce cards, get some negative fill. All of this you could fit easily in a trunk of a Honda Accord,
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I really want to thank you, Rene, for joining us today.
Oh no, it's my pleasure, man. I wish I could be more detailed and all, but you swerve off into different stories or ideas or whatever comes to mind. But I hope I was able to get a few things across here.
Of course, definitely. The conversation was A1 in my opinion. I hope that our young filmmakers got a lot out of it, and I think that they did. I mean, I definitely got a lot out of it myself. Maybe because I'm more inclined of being, or could relate to, or being behind the camera. So that was good conversation for me. But again, let me just say that this is our third webinar that we're having, and is that Shelly Boss? I did think Good, thank. Okay. I'm just reading some of the comments here. Yeah. So I'd just like to thank you guys for coming on board. Again, as I said, without you participating, this wouldn't be possible. So let me again thank our sponsors, the OECS, the Department of Creative Industries, St. Lucia National Trust for hosting our workshops at Pigeon Island, our other partners who are Loose Select and Events at Lucia. Rene, let me again thank you so much for joining us. I really am looking forward to see you in St. Lucia working on this project with us, and hopefully that we could, bring the industry to St. Lucia. Anything that you want to leave us with?
I can't wait. I tell you that. It kind of brings me back to the Puerto Rico, good old times there. Coming to an island first of all, meeting the locals, getting all the help they could possibly, which is the dedication, from people who want to have us there. It's priceless. It's we couldn't do these kind of things. It would be a disaster. So we do need the help from people that live and work on the island. It's a tremendous contribution to projects like the one we're about to start with Bob. It's quite a sizable endeavor, I think, that we're about to take on here. I don't know if Bob was here today. I hope so.
I didn't see him on though. But,
oh, you have a people list here. Oh, the 37 here on the bottom.
Yeah, that's the amount of people.
Oh, I see. Oh boy, that's a long list. Yeah. Okay. Well,
so again, let me.
Bob was hopefully busy trying to get the financing together.
Exactly, and we hope that he's getting some funding for this project also. So let's wish him luck on that one. Okay, Rene, thanks again, and thank you everybody for joining us on our.
Oh, we did well. 80 minutes. Wow.
Yeah.
We did well. 80 minutes.
And next week we'll be back, and hopefully that we can have further discussions with filmmakers in the industry. So thank you once again for joining us, and
you're welcome. Sorry for the technical mishaps here in the end, but
yeah, we're still getting a little echo from you, but I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I just talk like that. That's my. I have that. I have that skill.
You did that in post, right? Joe's taking care of that.
Too much coffee.
Yeah, Joe will clean that up first. Yeah.
Cool. Well.
Okay. All right. Great stuff. Okay.
Very
Talk
nice.
to you soon.